Eli Coleman leaned back in his first-class seat, gazing out the window as the plane inched along the runway. This wasn't his usual style. His private jet was undergoing maintenance, so he was, for once, among the general public on a commercial flight back to San Francisco. To most around him, he was just another well-dressed traveler, but those familiar with finance news might recognize the name Eli Coleman, an African-American billionaire and head of a leading investment firm, widely celebrated for his journey from modest beginnings to immense success. Eli had learned long ago that, despite his success, people often saw only what they wanted to. It had been a grueling day of back-to-back meetings, and he was ready for the reprieve of the sky. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Eli relaxed, mentally mapping out a few final adjustments to a major acquisition deal he'd just closed. Lost in thought, he barely noticed the flight attendant as she approached his row. "Sir, your seatbelt," she said curtly, her tone far from the typical first-class courtesy. Eli blinked, realizing his seatbelt was still undone. "Oh, sure," he said, quickly reaching for it. As he clicked it into place, the flight attendant remained, watching him with an expression that was more scrutinizing than friendly. Her badge read Nancy. With a frown, she reached forward and adjusted the belt tighter, even though Eli had already fastened it securely. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary," he said with a calm but firm voice. Nancy's eyes narrowed, her tone sharpening. "Excuse me? I'm here to make sure you follow the rules." Eli's brows furrowed. "I don't think I've broken any." Nancy's face contorted in irritation. "People like you always think they can bend the rules," she said, her voice rising. The passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, suddenly riveted to the brewing scene. Eli held her gaze, keeping his voice steady. "There's no need for this attitude. I followed every instruction." But Nancy wasn't finished. "People like you think you can throw your weight around in here. Well, I don't care who you are." She leaned closer, almost tauntingly. Before he could react, she raised her hand and slapped him across the face. The sharp sound seemed to echo through the cabin as gasps rippled from the surrounding passengers. Eli's head jerked to the side, his cheek smarting from the unexpected blow. A stunned silence fell over the cabin, as every pair of eyes turned to watch, wide with disbelief. Nancy's expression hardened, but a trace of uncertainty flickered in her eyes as Eli turned his gaze back to her. Calm, but now cold. He rose slowly, his towering presence unmistakable, and held her gaze. "That was a choice you'll regret," he said, his voice low. Nancy crossed her arms, attempting to mask her faltering composure with defiance. "If you don't sit down, I'll have you escorted off this plane," she shot back, her voice strained but still loud enough for those around to hear. Eli smiled, the kind of smile that hinted at calculated control rather than amusement. "You'll be learning shortly who's going to be escorted where," he replied coolly. Slowly, Eli reached for his phone, and without breaking eye contact, dialed a number. He spoke calmly but firmly. "Tom, it's Eli Coleman. I need you to contact the airline. There's been an incident, and we need this flight returned to the gate immediately." "No, I'll explain later. Just make it happen." He ended the call, slipping his phone back into his pocket. Nancy's expression shifted, her confidence slipping as realization dawned. Before she could respond, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. Due to unforeseen circumstances, we'll be returning to the gate. Please remain seated." Nancy took a step back, her face drained of color. What did you do?" she stammered, her voice a mere whisper. Eli gave her one last, piercing look. "I'm not someone you can treat however you like. That's a lesson you'll remember." Around him, passengers exchanged glances, murmuring in shock and intrigue, while Nancy could only stand, a look of dawning regret on her face. Moments later, the plane rolled back to the gate, a sudden and unexpected reversal. Nancy, the flight attendant, glanced around in alarm, her face turning pale as she registered the magnitude of her mistake. Eli had remained composed, though his phone buzzed softly in his hand. He glanced at the message, nodded to himself, and put it away as the plane came to a stop. Soon after, the flight supervisor stepped onto the plane, clearly briefed on the situation. The supervisor approached Eli with a respectful nod, eyes filled with apology and concern. "Mr. Coleman," he began, his voice calm but authoritative. "We've been informed of what happened. On behalf of the airline, I want to offer our sincerest apologies for this unacceptable behavior. Nancy, please step off the plane immediately." Nancy's jaw dropped, her shock written plainly across her face. "Wait, this isn't fair. He was out of line." "Now, Nancy," the supervisor repeated firmly, leaving no room for debate. Flustered, Nancy gathered her belongings, her hands shaking. As she walked down the aisle, passengers' eyes followed her, some whispering in disbelief, others shaking their heads in quiet judgment. Her career now seemed to be in free fall, with the incident putting any future in the industry in jeopardy. The cabin door closed behind her, leaving Eli to settle back into his seat, his expression calm as ever. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We'll resume our flight shortly. Thank you for your patience." Eli's phone buzzed once more. He glanced down, reading a message from his assistant confirming that the airline's executive team had taken action and were preparing a formal apology. With a quiet nod, Eli put his phone away. This wasn't about gloating, it was a statement. He had encountered far more significant struggles on his path to success, and a single slap wouldn't alter his course. But he couldn't allow a person like Nancy to misuse her authority unchecked. He had seen it too often, people with small measures of power, emboldened to treat others as less. His intervention was necessary, not just for himself, but for anyone else who might find themselves in Nancy's path. The new flight attendant approached him hesitantly, setting a fresh cup of coffee on his tray table. She looked up with an apologetic smile. "Mr. Coleman, we're very sorry for what happened. If there's anything you need, please let me know." Eli offered her a nod of appreciation. "Thank you. Just carry on as usual." She nodded back and quickly retreated, leaving him to his thoughts. He reached into his bag, retrieving his tablet to review the details of his company's latest acquisition. But the weight of what had transpired lingered. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a business suit leaned over slightly, his voice low. "Excuse me, sir. I couldn't help but see what happened back there. That was, well, quite a statement you made." Eli looked up, a hint of curiosity on his face. "A statement?" The man offered a nervous chuckle. "I mean, that woman deserved it. People in her position think they can treat others however they want. She probably thought she'd get away with it just because, well, you know." Eli held the man's gaze for a moment, noticing the awkward attempt at solidarity. He'd encountered this attitude many times, the kind of sympathy that recognized injustice only at a safe distance. He simply nodded and returned to his tablet, signaling the end of the conversation. "Well," the man added, feeling the subtle dismissal, "it was still good to see someone stand up to that." Eli resumed scrolling through his reports, his focus shifting back to the larger challenges ahead. There would always be people like Nancy, those who underestimated or disrespected others out of bias or a sense of superiority. But he knew his strength lay in rising above it, building and achieving despite obstacles. His journey was about more than money or power. It was about respect, demanded quietly but firmly. As the plane soared above the clouds, Eli felt a quiet sense of resolve. This experience, like many others, was another reminder of the uphill climb he and others often faced. For today, Nancy had learned a hard lesson in respect, but Eli knew his own journey was far from over. The world was still full of voices like hers, but he was ready for them, confident in his ability to stand his ground, and even prepared to leave a reminder whenever needed. As the plane steadied at cruising altitude, Eli Coleman leaned back in his seat, gazing out the window at the vast, endless expanse of clouds. It felt serene up here, miles above the petty battles and misunderstandings that so often marred daily life on the ground. Yet, the incident with Nancy lingered in his mind, not as a victory, but as a sobering reminder of how deeply ingrained prejudices could be, even in settings meant to prioritize professionalism and courtesy. Eli had learned through years of hard work and countless setbacks that respect was not something people automatically offered, regardless of one's accomplishments. It was something one had to command again and again. Moments like these, though draining, served as a reminder of why he had chosen to carry himself with grace and resolve. Every achievement, every dollar he earned, represented a defiance against those who believed he didn't belong at the top. And still, there were times when he was reminded that, in the eyes of some, he'd always be fighting for a place he had already rightfully earned. A soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. The new flight attendant, who had quietly observed the earlier altercation, stopped by with a respectful nod. "Mr. Coleman, just checking if there's anything more we can get for you," she said. He offered her a warm, genuine smile. "Thank you, I'm fine." She nodded and moved on, visibly relieved, as if she wanted to make up for what had happened. For Eli, this kindness wasn't about the coffee or the service. It was a small but welcome gesture, a reminder that there were still people in the world who understood how to treat others with dignity and respect, regardless of title, wealth, or background. As he returned to his tablet, reviewing the documents for his acquisition deal, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Beyond building his business and adding to his wealth, he was in a unique position to shape a new standard. A standard where people of every background and status could find respect, opportunity, and success. He could set that example not only in his company, but also in how he navigated his life, always extending respect where it was earned and demanding it when it wasn't. From across the aisle, the businessman who had awkwardly tried to show his support earlier glanced at him with a respectful nod. Eli gave him a nod in return, recognizing the man's intent even if it had been clumsy. People were learning, some slower than others, but they were learning. Change, Eli knew, was never immediate. It took patience, persistence, and most importantly, the courage to stand firm in uncomfortable moments, much like the one he had just experienced. As the hours passed and the plane began its descent towards San Francisco, Eli felt a new calm settle over him. He had faced many challenges, and there would undoubtedly be more like Nancy. But he knew his strength wasn't in how many people he could bring down. It was in how many he could lift up by showing that success didn't need to come at the cost of integrity. For him, power and wealth weren't just rewards. They were tools. Tools to open doors for others, tools to shift perspectives, and tools to quietly but firmly demand the respect he and countless others deserved. As the plane touched down, Eli took a deep breath, his mind already turning to the future and the bigger battles ahead. He knew that, for every person like Nancy, there were thousands watching, observing, and learning. Today was just another step on the journey, one he was more than ready to continue. And as he stood to exit, the familiar determination in his eyes was as strong as ever.